Good morning, and welcome to this extraordinary town hall session of the Munich Security Conference, Women, Life, Freedom, Visions for Iran. I'm Suzanne Maloney. I'm Vice President and Director of Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution in Washington. And on behalf of my friend and co-moderator, Karim Sadjadpour, who is a Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, I'm delighted to welcome you today for what I know is going to be a thoughtful, thought-provoking, and dynamic conversation on the dramatic developments that have taken place in Iran over recent months. Karim and I will briefly set the stage for our conversation this morning. We'll introduce our panelists, and then we'll get right into the conversation with them and with all of you. Let me just say a few words about what's been happening within Iran domestically. In mid-September, a young woman, Mahsa Jina Amini, was detained for improper hijab while visiting Tehran. She was beaten and died in custody. Her death precipitated an extraordinary wave of protests that have engulfed the country. Nearly 80 cities within days broke out in massive demonstrations. And these protests have been different in size and scope and endurance and in persistence and in leadership than anything Iran has witnessed in the past 44 years. The protesters were demanding an end to Iran's hijab laws, as well as legalized discrimination against women. But very quickly, their cries and slogans began focusing on the future of the Islamic Republic itself. Iran has experienced many waves of protests over the course of its 40-year history. But this appears to be something different. And these protests have coincided with an equally interesting and extraordinary set of developments on the international stage that appear to be not just coinciding, but in fact reinforcing what's happening at home and abroad. So with that, I'll turn to Karim, and then we'll come back and bring in our speakers this morning.
Thank you, Suzanne, and thank you all for coming. So in addition to Iran's dramatic internal events, as you all know, Iran is central to at least 6 common Western national security challenges. Obviously, one is nuclear proliferation. Second is energy security, a big issue now for Europe, terrorism, cybersecurity, the refugee crisis, and obviously the conflict in Ukraine. And for many of our friends and partners in the Middle East, Iran is to much of the Middle East what Putin's Russia is to Europe.
We have an embarrassment of riches here joining us on the stage to speak to these many issues. And I know that there will be many who want to get into the conversation as we go along. So I hope that you'll forgive me as I am ruthlessly efficient in introducing our distinguished speakers who will join us. I'll start with the gentleman to my left, Reza Pahlavi, who is the eldest son of Mohammad Reza Shah, who was the last Shah of Iran. He is a 3-time book author and has been dedicating his career to advocacy for a secular and democratic Iran. To his left is Nazanin Boniadi, who is an acclaimed actress of both screen and screening. She is also an equally dedicated and passionate advocate and proponent of human rights and democracy in Iran and around the world throughout her career. To her left is Masih Alinejad, a journalist, author, and renowned campaigner for human rights, for women's rights, and against compulsory hijab in Iran. To her left is Hannah Neumann. Hannah is a scholar of peace and conflict who has advised governments and ministries and NGOs and has served as a member of the European Parliament since 2019. And finally, we're honored to have with us today Senator Robert Menendez. Senator Menendez is a son of Cuban immigrants who has served and represented the state of New Jersey in the United States Senate since 2006. He currently serves as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. With that, I'd like to jump into the conversation. I'm so thrilled to start with Nazanin Boniadi, and I wonder if you could tell us today why this current set of protests and the unrest that has engulfed Iran since September seems to be different. How has it catalyzed the international community in a way that we haven't seen in previous rounds of protest in Iran?
Thank you, Suzanne. It's good to be with you all. Well, Iranians have grown accustomed to mass uprisings nearly once a decade for the past 40 years. The student protests of '99, the Green Movement of 2009, the Bloody November protests of 2019. But nothing really compares in fervor or magnitude to what we've seen in the past 5 months. And here's why. Of course, people are out on the streets, as they've been in the past few years, opposing the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. But not only that, they're now tearing down, burning photos, knocking down effigies of the founder of the Islamic Republic, Ayatollah Khomeini, and the late General Qasem Soleimani. But really the thing that sets these protests apart is that it's female-led. The spark and the engine of the protests have been women. Because of the murder in custody of Mahsa Amini, women took to the streets, not only waving their headscarves peacefully in protest, but this time, which they'd done already in starting in December 2017, but this time setting them ablaze, dancing in the streets, cutting their hair in protest, young schoolgirls chanting, "We don't want an Islamic Republic." So this courage has been contagious, and really what women have managed to do in Iran is galvanize Iranian society at large to understand the intersectionality of gender equality and every other basic human rights. And it has turned into a pro-democracy movement and really the greatest threat to the Islamic Republic that we've seen in 44 years.
Thank you, Nazanin, and that's a perfect segue to bring Masih into the conversation. Masih, you have been such a dedicated proponent of women's rights for so many years. Why is it that women are serving as such a key demographic in propelling these protests? Why is the issue of hijab so salient to the future of Iran?
First of all, I want to say that I'm very happy that I don't see the dictators here anymore from Iran, from my country. And for the first time, Munich Security Conference invited the people of Iran, the oppositions, those who say not only no to compulsory hijab, no to Islamic Republic. I'm very happy. This is just the first step. But I have to actually, to get back to your question, I want to see how many women are here. Yeah. So I'm asking a simple question. If you were from a country that your government were telling you, cover your hair, if you were the one that getting lashes, getting killed, getting raped for not just covering your hair, what would have been your reaction? Launching a revolution. This is what the Iranian people are doing. But clearly, we're not just fighting against compulsory hijab. As Nazanin said, as we all know, compulsory hijab is the main pillar of a religious dictatorship. It's, to us, to millions of Iranians, compulsory hijab is like the Berlin Wall. If we tear this wall down, the religious dictator, the Islamic Republic will be gone. So women are in the streets, shoulder to shoulder with men. They're saying that enough is enough. This is 21st century. The Islamic Republic not only forcing women to cover themselves, in Iran, they're forcing female politicians. If you go from European Parliament to my beautiful country, they're going to force you to cover yourself. So this is like forcing people, counting women like second-class citizens, killing, torturing, assassinating is in the DNA of the Islamic Republic. And that is why this protest is taking place across Iran to bring the Islamic Republic down.
Thank you. Let me turn now, excuse me all, I want to keep our conversation moving as quickly as we can because we have so many great voices to bring in. To Reza Pahlavi, you have spoken out on behalf of your country in exile for many years. And I wonder if you could speak to us about the role of the diaspora during this crucial moment.
I think the most important question that everyone has is what will happen if this regime goes? How do you fill the void? Who fills the void? For 4 decades, countries that have become today home to many Iranians who had to flee first generation from the time of the revolution. And today, perhaps there is a third generation of young Iranians living as German citizens, French citizens, Canadian, US citizens. When you look at them, how they contribute in your country as specialists, as doctors, as engineers, and what have you. Imagine why they would be here in the first place, as opposed to be able to be back home serving their own country. What keeps them from contributing is a regime that doesn't even listen to them, because they're not interested in the welfare of Iran. So a different Iran would mean immediately that you'll have true allies who believe in the very same principles of human rights and liberty that they can exercise here and unfortunately not in their country. So the minute this regime disappears, not only you instantaneously eliminate the combination of the problems that this regime has cumulatively created in 4 decades, as indicated by Karim, but the replacement are the people who think like you, want to work with you, are concerned about solutions that affect us all. Just to give you one key example, and something that I hold very dearly in mind, I'm very much concerned about the water crisis in Iran. I'm really concerned about the ecological impact it can have. Maybe even more conflicts within because of water shortages. Maybe other waves of immigrants fleeing the region. It's not just an Iranian problem, it's a regional problem. So we need to work with our immediate neighbors. We need to be able to bring the best scientists that are actually Israelis when it comes to water issues, as opposed to a regime that has antagonized everyone from the Saudis to the Israelis to all of our neighbors. A different Iran will work as partners for regional stability, which is key for economic development, which is key to satisfy the energy concerns that the West has, where Iran can be the greatest provider of that energy requirement. So you don't have to, every winter, be scared of the blackmailing of energy that Russia does in terms of shutting down the valve. These are the kind of things that you can see as a potential of a different Iran led by people who actually want to work with you and think like you. And this is exactly why we are here, and we are happy that after 40 years, as Masih said and Nazanin said, finally the world is talking to the voices of the alternative, as opposed to those who have been the problem in itself. And we welcome that, and we appreciate that greatly, and we hope to be able to convey the message that our compatriots have to the world, and work with those who want to back us up and support us so we can, as quickly as possible, resolve and remedy the situation, leading ultimately to a secular democratic future for us, which is the beginning of the huge change that will change the world as much as this regime, unfortunately, in a negative way, impacted the world.
Senator Menendez, as chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Iran has occupied your time in at least 5 different ways that I can count. One is to counter their nuclear ambitions. The second is to counter their malign regional ambitions. The third is to counter Iran's support for Vladimir Putin in his war against Ukraine. Domestically, for the United States, Iran perhaps holds more US citizens hostage than any other nation in the world. And Iran is actively trying to assassinate senior former US officials. I'm curious, Senator Menendez, whether you agree with many Iranian activists that if we get change right in Iran, political transformation right in Iran, it could actually resolve all of these 5 aforementioned issues. How do you see the impact of internal political dynamics in Iran for US interests and global geopolitics?
Well, thank you, Karim, for the question, Suzanne, and thank you to the Munich Security Conference for inviting me to join the panel. Look, for more than 2 decades in the United States Congress, I've been focused on Iran. Not the Iran that we hope could and can be someday a secular democratic nation in which its people's hopes and dreams and aspirations are realized. I do believe, for those who believe that the present protests of 150 plus days and going are going to be more of the same, I think they're tragically confused and wrong. I think there is a fundamental difference in what has given rise to these protests, as has been very aptly said by our colleagues here. Women are leading the way, and when women lead the way, there is a dramatic difference in the continuing reality of their standing up for what they believe in a very powerful way. And I think that has created also a change in the view of the Iranian people as to not what the regime will do next, but what comes next after the regime. And in that regard, I think that leads us to the possibilities of having an Iran that is democratic, secular, living within the family of nations, can be incredibly prosperous because of its people and its own domestic riches, but can do so without threatening the security of its neighbors and the world. So I do believe that this process is an opportunity if we grab it. We lost the Green Revolution. We cannot lose another one again. I think for those of my colleagues in the world who are concerned about being confrontational, ask the Iranian people whether or not there should be the ability to confront Iran in support of the Iranian people. I think the regime, for those who had some romanticism or confusion about it, has shown its incredible nefarious ways in so many different dimensions, most particularly against its own people. I think the international community needs to wake up to the tear gas and start acting resolutely against the regime on behalf of the Iranian people. This can be a defining moment for a difference.
Thank you so much. And I'll ask a follow-up about geopolitics, but first let me turn to Hannah Neumann. Hannah, I think many Iranians, both inside the country and outside the country, would argue that after 44 years, this month marks the 44th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, this regime has shown itself totally incapable of meaningful reform. I'm curious whether you would agree with that assessment and whether you think that European officials have also reached that similar conclusion.
Good morning, everyone. I think what the brave people inside Iran managed in the last 4 months, also strengthened by the voices from diaspora who have the privilege to speak more freely, is that almost everyone understands how brutal this regime is towards its own citizens, but also how much it is terrorizing a whole region. And just recently, they have clearly sided with Putin in another aggression, I think, that is very close to our concern in the European Union, that is the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. But now everyone, as Reza Pahlavi said, is trying to see, okay, if it's not the regime, and I think this we have kind of established, what could it be then?
Sorry.
And this is why I'm very happy for the decision that the Munich Security Conference took to say we are no longer inviting the Islamic regime representatives who have been here until last year, but we also start trying to understand what could be the alternative. We're having some dissident voices sitting here. We have seen just over the weekend another important thing in Iran where a trade union, student union, issued a manifesto clearly speaking up for secular democracy, for referendum, for allowing Iranian people to decide. So what we see is these protests are becoming more political and they are forming around very clear demands. So they are trying all the different groups. We also see Nazanin today, who is under enormous pressure, speaking up on CNN. So everyone kind of comes out, becoming very political and giving this a direction of trying to describe the alternative in all its diversity, but clearly against the regime. Now the question is, where stands the European Union? The European Parliament has been very clear. On the other hand, the German Minister of Foreign Affairs has been very clear. The Dutch Parliament has been very clear. On the other hand, for the celebrations of the 44th anniversary of the revolution, we had the ambassadors of Ukraine and Poland shaking hands with Reza. And that is basically where we are in the European Union. We have those who are very clear saying this regime does not represent the people of Iran anymore. And we have those who still try to figure out how to deal with the regime. And it's an internal debate that we're having, but I really have the impression it's shifting more. The more we can see what could the alternative vision be, and that is why the work that is happening is so important, the more I think we see a shift. And the fact that Iran is clearly siding with Russia, I think will speed this up.
Thank you so much. I have one follow-up for both of you, and I'll ask one question for both of you. President Biden said in comments which were meant to be off the record, but were on tape, that the nuclear deal is in fact dead, but he's not going to announce it dead. The head of the IAEA, Mr. Grossi, said that the JCPOA is an empty shell. I'm curious whether you both would agree with that assessment, and do you believe that U.S. strategy, U.S. policy, and European policy has yet adapted to that reality that the JCPOA could in fact be dead?
Shall I start?
Please.
I think Biden, with his statement, in the most polite way possible towards those who are still trying to revive the JCPOA, told them that the US may no longer be on board. This is how I interpret it, but you may know him better. I would agree with the assessment that at the moment it is an empty shell, clearly. I mean, the Iranian regime walked away twice last year from an almost done deal, once in March, once in September. What the Iranian regime gets from continuing negotiation is quite clear: international legitimacy, red carpets, phone calls, attention. What we get from it, I don't know, because they clearly prove they don't want to sign something. I can't imagine us at the moment shaking hands with them and lifting sanctions. So what the JCPOA, if we were to revive it, would do is stabilize the regime while people in Iran are willing to die for its downfall. This is why I think we should just leave it where it is. No one's negotiating. Let's leave it there. As long as this regime kills its own people, we are not going to negotiate. Now the question is, what is it then? And it's rightful to ask it, because this regime with a nuclear bomb is also a huge problem. So, I mean, the Gulf states have been saying that to us for more than 10 years. We need a plan B. We need the plan B anyways, because how can you run into a negotiation, put all your eggs in the basket that this regime will agree with you on something? So yes, we have to discuss the plan B. Yes, we should not resume talks as long as these people kill this regime. And down the line, the best way to get rid of the nuclear threat is to get rid of the regime.
Yes.
I did not vote for the first JCPOA. I thought it was an error, a mistake. It did nothing about Iran's other nefarious activities, did nothing about its missile development, did nothing about the destabilization of its neighbors and the region. It did nothing about its proxies, violent proxies in different parts of the world, and it did nothing about violating the human rights of its own people, even at that time. And so I didn't support it then, and I don't think that the iteration that was being contemplated made any sense, because it was even worse than the first deal from my perspective. Gave us a very little window on their fissile material. So I do think that I agree with my fellow parliamentarian, and I have been advocating within the administration, there needs to be a plan B. The Iranians themselves walked away from what had been, I think, a good deal for them. And in recognizing that, you need to do a few things. Number one, you need to affirmatively say that plan is off the table. It's not only moribund, but it's gone. Two, I think you need to organize the region in a collective missile defense situation that sends a very clear message to Iran. There are consequences for attack. Three, I think you have to multilateralize our sanctions. And this is where I hope the Europeans would join us. I know for a long period of time, they had aspirations that Iran would live within the context of an international agreement and abide by it. That aspiration should be gone, and they should understand that only multilateralizing sanctions, particularly against regime leaders, so that the people aren't hurt, but that the regime is, and there are many ways you can do that. And then lastly, I think that we need to have greater efforts in bringing accountability for the massive numbers of people who have been arrested, killed, executed by hanging. At the end of the day, that all must have a consequence to it. And I hope the international community will join us in that regard. We have an opportunity to make a difference if we collectively act at a time that there should be no doubt about what the regime really is all about.
Thank you to both.
I sympathize with this need to try to find a plan B for the nuclear issue with respect to Iran. I've just written an article that's coming out in Foreign Affairs next month on that very topic. But I will tell you, when I talk to US government officials, what they often say to me, quietly of course, is that we've seen this movie before. In 2009, 1 million people came to the streets of Tehran, and it looked like this was going to be the end of the regime briefly. And yet we were able, in the aftermath of that, to negotiate a deal that actually kept Iran further away from a nuclear weapon, which is in the interest of the United States, in the interest of the international community, and in the interest of the Iranian people as well. How do you counter that? And I'll ask you perhaps to go in order here, starting with Masih.
I mean, I have plan B. It's not me. Many of us believe that if you really want to have an Iran without bomb, you have to not helping Iranians, I don't want the Europeans or Americans bring democracy for us. None of us want. We want you to understand what Iranian people are shaking the regime. We want the West to stop shaking the hand of this murderous regime. We want the West to stop saving this regime. Yeah, as you mentioned, 2009, people were in the street calling Obama to support them. But at the same time, Obama's administration were trying to get a deal. It has been 2 decades, the European countries trying to have a deal with Iran. They achieved nothing. So this is the time that the Europeans, Americans, they have to sign a deal with Iranians, with the people of Iran, not with the government. And how? The plan B is very, very clear. Now Iranians want regime change. We don't want you to say regime change if you're scared of the word, but this is very, very important to stand in the right side of the history. The US government took the lead to kick out the Islamic Republic from women's top body at the United Nations. How ironic. Iran had a seat at the United Nations to monitor women's rights globally just a few days ago. So the US government did a great job. Now we want you to be as united as dictators and kick out the Islamic Republic from everywhere. First, the US actually designated the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization. I don't get it why the EU still hesitate to do it. Second, this is a women-led revolution. The West, the European countries always say that we are for equality, for democracy, for dignity. So this is one of the historical revolution, and I believe that the Western countries can get united and have an international women's march for women of Iran. And right now that I'm talking to you, it's not just for women of Iran. The Iranian regime sending drone to Putin to kill innocent Ukrainian. I remember that my friend Gary Kasparov for years and years was warning the rest of the world about the danger of Putin's regime. The world, the Western country was saying that Putin is in Georgia, so we are not Georgian. Putin is in Syria, we are not Syrian. Now Putin is in the heart of Europe. So this is going to happen the same. If you really don't take a strong action against the Islamic Republic, believe me, the Revolutionary Guard is going to come on US soil, to European soil, and assassinate non-Iranians, which they have been doing. You can actually give a better picture of what the Revolutionary Guards has been doing for years and years outside Iran. So the plan B, believe me, people of Iran are better allies than these backward mullahs. You can count on us. And Iran, without the Islamic Republic, can be a better, can help the rest of the world to be a much safer place to live. We are ready to have an Iran without the Islamic Republic. We are wondering whether the West is ready, or still they sanction one day the Revolutionary Guard, the clerics, and the other day they want to negotiate with this murderous regime. Be ready for an Iran without the Islamic Republic. That's all we can say.
Nazanin.
I very much agree with what Masih said. And of course, as Karim alluded to earlier, we've now had a 44-year case study on the Islamic Republic, and we can very much safely say that the reform movement is dead. Reform is just not possible. The very pillars that keep the system up in Iran ensure that its wrongs cannot be made right. And as Chairman Menendez said earlier, this female-led movement. Historians and scholars have shown that anytime you have women centered in protest, the chances of democracy and the movements being successful is much higher. The margin between success and failure is very slim, however, so we have to, as the international community, ensure that we tip that scale in favor of the protesters. And how do we do that? Much like what Masih said, we have to ensure that we're supporting and empowering civil society in Iran and disempowering the regime, and our policies, I think, have to reflect that.
I would like to take this opportunity and say that as we are facing two parliamentarians here, as much as the world says, is the Iranian opposition united? Can they work together? Our expectation from the free world is to have bipartisan support or multi-partisan support for the Iranian cause, which means that regardless of where, as a German or as a French or as an American, you're in the political spectrum, the question that Iran needs is solidarity in the principles that we are fighting for. And we hope to have the support in any country we speak to with their representative to understand that our ask is to be unified in the same way you expect us to be unified, rightfully so. We also hope that you will be unified in supporting the Iranian people. And this is a perfect opportunity as we engage with parliamentarians or leaders of different governments to understand that the only way to find exactly the how, what can be done, in fact, besides maximum pressure, which is further sanctions and what have you, but we are also hoping to have maximum support for the people. What are the areas and things that can be immediately done? For instance, internet access, very important. For instance, a strike fund to support striking workers and the funding of it, which are many ways we can come up with solutions, and many, many more. It is only as a result of these kind of discussions that those of us who are in direct contact with our activists at home to come together with ideas of how it can, in fact, as Nazanin was saying, and as Masih was indicating, how can we empower our civil society at home? How can we empower our activists at home? How can the diaspora see where they fit into this and what's their role from the outside in supporting our compatriots? And this plan B that we're all talking about starts with having a direct dialogue. 40 years have gone by. I wish we had started sooner, but I'm glad that finally the opportunity has arrived. So we are working full force to make sure that we meet our end of the bargain. We hope from the other side that we'll also have as much receptivity so we can, in fact, engage in discussions that will provide us with the solutions of how best to implement this overall strategy and to reduce the cost of transition as much as possible to the Iranian people and as fast as possible, because the opportunity cost every day that goes by becomes more and more costly for Iranians, and not just for us, I think, for the rest of the world as well.
Thank you all for that terrific discussion. I'd like to now open it up to the audience. We'll take a few questions at once. If you can be as concise as possible, and please introduce yourself. We can get through as many questions as possible. The first two people I had on my list were Omid Nouripur and Mina Oraibi. So is Omid here? So Mina, why don't you start, please?
Thank you. Mina Al-Oraibi. I'm editor-in-chief of The National, but I'm also Iraqi. And so forgive me, but I have to mention that it's been 20 years since the Iraq War. And while Iraqis used to say, show us death, we'll accept the fever. This is a saying in Arabic or in Iraqi, Rawini al-Mot arda bil-Skhuna. And the idea was that Saddam was death, an American invasion would be a fever. So I say that only from the point of trying to understand more about the plan B, but also how to get there. It's very clear from what you said, Masih, you don't want Americans and Europeans to come and do the job of the Iranians, but at the same time, there's concern of what does this look like, and what would it look like to have the transition from the regime?
Thank you. Let's take one more question. Madame in the front, please.
Hello, my name is Horvash Porkian from International Women in Power and Leadership from Hamburg. I would like to ask Shahzadeh Reza Pahlavi, you know, the manifest of Iranian women is woman, life, freedom. And, you know, we are living in a patriarchal society. And I would like to know, where is the stand of the women in Iran? What are you, how do you say, representing? Because Masih is really fighting. Nazanin is fighting so much. But where is your standing? I mean, you also say, always keep telling woman, life, freedom. But where do you see our women in future in Iran? And
Thank you.
What are you going to do for them? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, as a father of 3 daughters, if you were to ask my wife, I don't think you'll find a stronger feminist in support of the women in Iran. I'm sure Masih knows that too, because you know my wife, you talked to her before. So this is not rhetoric, this is fundamental belief. The first victims of this regime were women who became instantaneously second-class citizens. This cannot be tolerated by any stretch of imagination. What's the guarantee for equality, for end to any form of discrimination. It's the rule of law based on a constitution that will ultimately be based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which explains so many areas that needs to be observed. So the fact that women in Iran today are leading the movement is a natural answer to what was caused against them by this regime. And we cannot imagine a country, especially that I think a higher percentage of women in Iran are educated than men are, for them to be disenfranchised and not be part of our country's rebuilding. Women have always been the core of stability, and the unit starts at the family level. I often refer to the fact that our biggest challenge is not necessarily to put the right political structure. Our problem is not to have our vibrant civil society making sure that we don't deviate from the democratic path. What I believe will be the toughest challenge, which is not overnight, is instilling a new culture. We have to educate ourselves to accept a democratic culture, which is not automatic, which is also embedded in your question. Where does that start? It starts from the family. Male chauvinism, or whatever you want to call it, in the patriarchal society can only be changed when women in that cycle have the support of their male counterpart. You see that today. You see that today, even though it's women's life freedom, but women are not alone. They're backed by their fathers, by their husbands, by their brothers, by their sons. So this movement has the support of Iranian male in the sense that it is not a men-women thing. It is an Iranian freedom thing that serves us all. And I'm glad that women are leading it because it will set a new standard for our part of the world in general. And if Iran can achieve its future democracy on the basis of this revolution, which is the first of its kind in the world, it's the first women's revolution in the world as far as I can tell, we can prove that we can overcome all of these issues because this is beyond rhetoric. It's actual belief in equality, in justice, and ending any kind of discrimination. And the discrimination against women has been the most obvious one. And therefore, the alternative starts with eliminating that discrimination.
I want to answer my sister from Iraq. Sister, as you know, we have common enemy in the Middle East, the Islamic Republic. The main slogan, massive protest in Lebanon, was against the Islamic Republic. Massive protest in Iraq was against Qasem Soleimani, Khamenei, and the Islamic Republic. So Middle East must get united against the common enemy, but to have a smooth transition, it's very clear that for years and years, the Islamic Republic survived because they could create division between oppositions. And trying to sell this narrative to the Western countries, saying that, you know, if Iran, Islamic Republic is gone, we're going to be Syria. Iran is going to be Libya. Iran is going... No, you have to compare Iran with our own history. And I believe that right now, we, the oppositions, inside and outside, are united. This is the unique time. We see sense of unity among Kurds, Turks, Baluch people, men, women together, and opposition outside Iran. I believe that to have three members of this coalition are here. We actually wrote our manifest, our charter, based on human rights, the rights of LGBT community, the rights of minority, the rights of women. And I think the time has come for the leaders of democratic country to meet with the opposition without any fear and to hear the voice of Iranians. This is how we can have a smooth transition to a secular democracy. I want to say that if you really look for stability in the region, believe me, you cannot go and negotiate with one of the most unstable regimes which make mess everywhere.
In order to bring in as many voices as possible, I'm going to take the next two questions back to back. And please identify whom you'd like to respond, or we'll ask all of our panelists to get back into the conversation. So I'll start with one on either side. Over here, and then the lady in the blue. I'm sorry, I don't recognize all of you without my glasses.
Thank you very much. My name is Alexei Goncharenko. I'm a member of Ukrainian parliament representing Odessa. And before I ask a question, I will just tell you a very small story. It was beginning of October. I woke up in my house in Odessa with my wife and two my kids because of explosions very close to us. And that was Iranian drones. Like for years, Ukraine was not taking active role about Iran because it was like too far away from us, you know. The same story about Belarus, one more dictator, Lukashenko, also people were saying, oh, it's not so interesting. After this, from Belarusian soil, Iranian drones come into our heads, falling in our hands and killing us. After this, Iranian regime shot down Ukrainian plane, civilian plane in sky of Tehran, and now with Russian weaponry. And today Russia is killing us with Iranian weaponry. So I think the lesson is clear. We can't tolerate evil. We can't contain evil in their borders. It's just impossible. So the only thing we should do, we should fight with evil, and we should win, because free world is definitely stronger. So my question is to Chairman Menendez. You are very wise and respected and experienced politician, and you saw a lot of stories. Do you, today, what can you say? Do you believe it is possible to have deals with dictators? What do you think about this? Because today, again, we hear that we need to have deal with Iranian regime, and others saying we have to make a deal with Putin's regime, with some concessions from Ukraine, which is for us unacceptable. So I just want to hear your voice and your opinion on this. Azadi Bera Iran.
Oh, thank you.
We will take one additional question, and then we'll ask Chairman Menendez and other speakers to respond.
Good morning. I'm Maha Yahya. I'm the director of the Carnegie Middle East Center in Beirut. Hi, Karim. The courage that the people of Iran and the women of Iran have shown over the past 4 months has been remarkable and mind-blowing. But, and there is a but there, my question is to perhaps the opposition, but also to all the panelists. The regime in Iran, the ICRG in particular, controls the means of violence, controls the weapons, it controls the military, it controls the economy, and it controls politics. They have their grip on the key areas of governance, of power in Iran. What is the plan? If the plan is to transition away from the regime, how do you go about that? And how do you bring together the voices of the outside with the voices of the inside? There is a reality there, I mean, that we all have to, and I mean, without, again, this is not a call for direct intervention. So parking aside the direct intervention which happened in Iraq, and I think this is partly what Mina was trying to allude to, what can the US and Europe do to help this in this process?
We'll start with Chairman Menendez responding to the first and perhaps the second question as well, then turn to Nazanin and hopefully bring in the rest of the panelists if they wish to comment as well.
Well, thank you, and our admiration of the Ukrainian people. When I travel the world, I say there's one thing you cannot purchase. You can purchase arms from the United States, you can do a whole bunch of other things, but you cannot purchase the courage and the commitment to freedom that the Ukrainian people have shown. So my salute to the Ukrainian people, and through you, their representative. No, you cannot deal, from my view, my family fled dictatorship. I understand what that means. And so for my 30 years in Congress, and in the last several as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, it's about promoting democracy and human rights globally. And you cannot deal with dictatorship or authoritarians, whether it be Putin, who creates an existential threat here in Europe in the 21st century, or in Iran. And containment never works successfully. The Iranians have shown when I say the Iranians, the regime has shown every iteration of what is wrong with a country that is led by an authoritarian regime. They seek to destabilize their entire region by violence. They have terrorist proxies. They seek, in a country that has some of the world's largest oil and natural gas reserves, you don't really need nuclear energy for domestic energy consumption. They have been on a march towards a nuclear weapon. We cannot allow that to happen. And they have shown their oppression against their own people. The sham trials, the hangings, the mass arrests, over 20,000. So I just hope that other countries that have been reticent, yes, this is not about intervention. The United States does not seek, nor does it want, nor will it intervene. But if the Iranian people alone are left without the support to create the environment, we must give them more than 20 minutes on VPN on Signal. We must do more than having code conversations on Zoom. We must, in a technologically advanced world, be able to give the Iranian people the opportunity to speak to each other and organize with each other in peaceful efforts to try to change their government. But from the outside, there is much that countries in the world can do. You have to hit it where it hurts them. You know, the reality is, whether it's the Revolutionary Guard, and it's cowards that send Revolutionary Guard members to rape Iranian women, and whether it's the Revolutionary Guard, whether it is the regime headed to its highest levels, whether it is on questions of oil, whether it is of questions of selling its drones, not only to Russia, but others that try to subvert global freedom. This has to be a collective effort, and I hope that our fellow parliamentarians from democratic countries in Europe and elsewhere join us, because if we do that, then we will create the openings for the Iranian people to decide their own future, which, of course, I hope will be secular, democratic, and part of the family of nations in which, you know, the Iranian people will thrive dramatically.
I'm in agreement, in full agreement with what Chairman Menendez is saying. Iranian people are not looking for intervention, and too often, you know, support and maximum support for the Iranian people is conflated with interventionism, and those two things are completely separate. And to speak on the point about the IRGC, I think what's important to recognize is we have pressure from the bottom, of course, with the protests. And it's really important that the international community just gets out of the way and stops supporting, you know, stop engaging essentially in business as usual with the Islamic Republic, because that funding and support for the Islamic Republic is actually funding the repression. But it's also important to recognize that there have been fissures at the top. And they aren't enough, but there are some. So Vice Media recently reported on fissures in the IRGC. It's just that they are arrested and taken to undisclosed locations and silenced and tortured. But really, I think withdrawing that support for the regime and just getting out of the way and allowing the people of Iran to self-determine is really what we're asking for.
Hannah Neumann, did you want to jump in?
I would like to jump in because I think, and it has been quite clear, we have different roles and we should be quite understanding of the different roles. The demand from your end has been clear to the international community: stop stabilizing the regime. It's something, it's in our power, it's something we can do, it's political decision making that we stop stabilizing this regime. The question for the plan then is one that it's not on us. It's on the people of Iran, it's on those in the diaspora, it's on those inside the country. Hopefully those inside every prison will become part of this discussion as well. It's a discussion that is for you, but if we stop stabilizing the regime, I mean, the potential grows that you can have this discussion not just as a theoretical discussion, but as a meaningful discussion, because there's actually something to decide on. We could maybe become part of enabling safe spaces, of seeing how this discussion can happen in a respectful way, where people can have different political opinions and would then not be blamed as being pro-regime or against regime or being corrupt or not corrupt, that we have this, let's say, in a more respectful way. This is another role. But aside of that, I mean, Iranian people have everything. Culture, brains, I mean, smartness, education, it's all there. It's just that so far there has been so much infighting where apparently the enemy was not the regime but each other. And if we stop this, that's your job, right? I think we can really move on. And the question, will it succeed, will it not, after 44 years? I live 500 meters away from Stasi headquarters. That was also an entity that had grip of everything. Politics, economy, secret service, very repressive. And it was a peaceful revolution that brought this down. You cannot say in hindsight, what was it? I mean, the moment was in the end some guy making a weird statement that no one understood and the war was open, right? But I mean, it didn't come out of nothing. It came out of people being in the streets and the international community also exerting pressure. So I would say there is hope, but everyone has to do their job.
Thank
and
you.
Maybe next year, that's the one thing, maybe next year Iran can also be represented by those who are in prison right now. That would be...
Next year, we're going to have this panel in Iran, maybe.
If I may inject one point of why is it important to sanction the IRGC? Obviously, you have an armed mafia which controls every aspect. By diminishing their capabilities, it weakens the regime even more. But it's not only for that reason that IRGC should be sanctioned. As you understand, a peaceful transition will mean maximum defection from this regime to the camp of the people. And there has to exist an exit strategy for those who want to peel away, so they have terra firma on the other side. In order to facilitate that, many of these elements cannot be held accountable for serious crimes. At the end of the Second World War, you had the Nuremberg trials, but you didn't go after every single soldier that fought in the Nazi army. So in that sense, there are many elements that are part of that system that won out, and we have to offer them that exit strategy. We have to talk about transitional justice. What happens? How do we deal with these issues? Bringing those arguments into the equations facilitates the understanding of why they need to be ostracized now. And in fact, I believe that the more IRGC is sanctioned, the more likely they are to think that we can no longer stick with this regime. And in fact, it will create more motivation for them to defect from the regime towards the people, as opposed to the status quo. So consider that in your calculations as well.
Thank you. So let's take a couple more questions. Gentlemen in the front and Madame in the front, please identify yourself and be as concise as possible.
Try to get one more in.
Yes, Michael Gala, I'm also a member of the European Parliament, and I have a concrete plea to you, because I think it's very necessary that you upgrade your position towards the decision makers in Europe and beyond. You know who represents the Iranian opposition every day physically in the European Parliament and probably in many other parliaments? It's these awful National Council of Resistance. They are physically present every day, and they pretend to be the Iranian opposition, and they are the ones who are infiltrating the mindset of many colleagues, often from countries who have recently liberated themselves and who think, oh, well, they are the ones now. So please be physically present and get your voices heard as a real alternative, because I think these Pomoy guys, they do not represent the people and the opposition. That's the plea. And my question is, given the fact that there are so many vested interests and so many regime people who have to lose everything when the regime falls, how can you actually, what can we do if we are not, as you rightly said, we shall not produce the regime change from outside, but what can we actually do apart from what was already mentioned, isolating the regime, yes, and declaring them terrorist organization, everything. What else can we do as decision makers to help you without replacing your own efforts? Thank you.
Thank you. And just to clarify, he was referring to the Mujahideen Khalq, please.
Thank you. My name is Suzanne. I was deputy spokesperson to the German federal foreign minister when the deal was actually negotiated. And I have a question. I mean, we all know that the Trump sanctions harmed the civil society, right? There was great hope when we did the deal that reformers would get in power and the whole country would move to in a different direction. My question right now is, what do you think of a revision of the sanctions regime? Is there anything you say how we can support the civil society economically and financially? Because we have to do something, right? If you want to have them go on the streets and protest, you have to also support them economically, financially in a way. And we don't see any means. I mean, I don't see any means right now with this sanctions regime to do so. So my question is to Masih, Nazanin, and Reza. What is it that we can do in order to support the civil society financially first? And what do you think of a revision of the sanctions regime second?
Thank you.
I want to actually make it very clear that MEK does not represent Iranian people. Iranian people inside the country are brave enough to be their own representative. We are in a direct contact with them, and as Mr. Pahlavi and Nazanin mentioned, in our declaration, in our charter, we actually want to have a secular democracy. Those who do not believe in democracy, those who do not even engage with Iranians, they're not engaging with us to talk directly about what they want for the future of Iran. I'm very, very, very surprised at how they're being welcomed by the member of European Parliament, by some of the senators and member of the congressmen in America. So this is very clear. But I want to say that about sanction, to be honest, people were celebrating in the street, some of them, because of the deal. But after the deal, the benefit did not go to the people of Iran. The benefit of the deal went to the dictators, to the terrorist organization, to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to Bashar Assad, Hassan Nasrallah. So clearly, we not want the West to sanction the people of Iran. This is very clear. But we, the people of Iran, know the best that while we were suffering from sanction, the money went to 51 religious institutions. One of them is morality police. And morality police is a bunch of police walking around and picking on you women and telling you cover yourself properly. The money went to IRGC. The money went to the son of Khamenei, the son of Khomeini. They have their own institution. اصلا نمیتونم به انگلیسی چجوری بگم که پسر خمینی و خامنه‌ای هم institution داره ما بهشون پول میدیم. This is, I cannot even say that in English, that Khamenei and Khomeini's son have institutions, and the money that the US government, the Europeans send to them through the deal goes to them, to the son of these dictators in Iran. So that is why I don't believe that sanction itself hurts people. It's a corruption of the clerics. And that is why I strongly believe that a strategic sanction can help. I want the Western country to address Khamenei and the Islamic Republic the way that they address Putin. That's very clear. If you sanction Putin, you have to sanction Khamenei. If you isolate Putin, you have to isolate Khamenei. If you kick out Putin and Russia from international sports, you have to do the same with the Islamic Republic, because the Islamic Republic uses sports to normalize its murderous regime. If you want to add anything.
I fully agree with Masih. You know, it's interesting. We are very much in touch with civil society inside Iran. So when we come up with this charter and we send it out into the world, please know that this is not something that we have concocted. It is something that has been, you know, really devised by the people of Iran, inside Iran. And I think the reason we had this event at Georgetown University was to ensure that there's a unified move for secular democracy inside Iran, but it's a pluralistic one. It's not simply one group that's being represented, and I think that's very important. And with regards to sanctions, I would just say, if you look at South Africa, Nelson Mandela called for sanctions, and that's not an anti-people thing. You're trying to change the system, and sometimes that is really the only punitive measure that you have. And it's the people of Iran who are actually calling for this sort of isolating the regime. And Anne Applebaum, in her cover story for The Atlantic, said it best. You know, we, the international community, autocrats have been so united, and democracies have failed in uniting on this front. So I would just urge democracies, all democratic leaders, to really find a way to support and heed the calls of the people of Iran. And if you listen to them closely, they're not saying, you know, death to America for the sanctions or death to Trump. They're actually saying death to the Islamic Republic.
Can I very briefly, because I think we're almost out of time, but first of all, I believe listening to a wide range of voices who want to see freedom for the Iranian people and are committed to democracy and human rights is important. And so I'll listen to everybody at the end of the day. With reference to the sanctions, sanctions are an imperfect tool, and they are certainly not meant to hurt the people who we seek to liberate. And if there are ways in which we can legitimately help get resources to those struggling inside of Iran to create freedom for its own people, I think we can find ways to alleviate any sanctions impediment to that, if that is the goal, and we can legitimately make sure that the end user actually is going to get the benefit at the end of the day. But I would echo what has been said here, that ultimately it is the Iranian regime that has repressed its people. Even when flows of money were going as a result of the JCPOA, they did not improve the lives of the Iranian people. They continued to oppress it. They continued to jail it. They continued to torture it. And they did not make the quality of life better for Iranians, because at the end of the day, they absconded with the money into the Ayatollah's various entities as well as to other regime figures. So I will not join in the club that suggests that sanctions, at the end of the day, which are meant to help the Iranian people achieve their own freedom, is the oppression of the Iranian people. It is the regime that oppresses the Iranian people. And when it gets relief, it doesn't create relief for the Iranian people. It only enriches itself.
Thank you so much. We're unfortunately out of time. I apologize if I didn't get to your questions, but please join me in thanking the speakers.